So hopefully this video doesn't come out until after that's released, so we get a shot at that.
I mean, we can release this video whenever we want.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome to Super Social Club. I'm Jeremy.
This is Whisky in the Six. I'm Rob.
Welcome to the Whiskey Rant podcast.
It's a little crusty,
It's frustrating.
and it's going to be a little bit of a rant.
I don't understand it. I don't know why.
Some sort of injustice.
Anyway, end rant.
Hello and welcome back to the Whiskey Rant podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Rob.
Tonight, joined by special guests, Bob and Tyson from Two Brewers Distillery, one distillery in Canada that we regard as probably up there, if not the best maker of whiskey right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've sung your praises to anyone that would listen for a long time, so it's a pleasure having both of you guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Rob's been reviewing Two Brewers whiskey before anyone, even on this side of the country, knew what Two Brewers was. He was doing reviews probably way back in, what, 6-7 years ago?
Maybe not that long, but it's been a while. It's been a while. And I mean, I feel like I was almost late to the party though. Like, I mean, I do have some earlier expressions, but that being said, they've been around and I kind of, I feel like I missed the boat for a while there.
As far as like the YouTube whiskey community is concerned, though, you were really the only person reviewing Two Brewers at the time, for the most part.
Yeah, for them, I mean, Mark Whiskey Whistle was reviewing a bit of that, the Two Brewer stuff, and then I think Trinity and C. I'm not sure how early they got onto the ship, but
Well, I mean, your
Uh,
passion towards this distillery was very evident, and we were always joked, it's like, "Oh, does Rob you like Two Brewers, Rob?"
yeah,
Shocker.
Rob likes Two Brewers. Yeah. Um, so we're missing one of the owners tonight, which is quite all right because we have you two gentlemen. And Bob, if you don't mind, like maybe share with the viewers how this all started. There's actually some people just listening instead of watching. So yeah, how this all started, what was the idea behind it? Where are you originally from? Because the distillery, for those who don't know, is in Yukon, Yukon Territories, which is northern Canada. So
Yeah, we started as a brewery, and we're still a brewery. We opened the doors in 1997, so been making beer now for 27 or so years. And my partner, Al Hansen, who is not with us tonight, and I, just as we were rolling, Al, who's a chemical engineer, almost on day one said, "You know what? Someday we should buy a still." And my answer was always, "Al, we're so broke that that's just not happening like any time in my lifetime." And about once a year, Al would bring that up, and slowly but surely we got less broke, and the idea of buying a still started to make a little bit of sense. So in 2007, when we were 10 years old, we agreed to start doing some research on what might be involved. We really didn't know much about it other than Al, as a chemical engineer, knew all about distilling and how the science worked. So we went off to a class at Michigan State University that was put on by Christian Karl, who's a still maker in Germany. And in that class, we started to learn what was involved and started to realize that, you know what, we can probably do this. The original plan, quite honestly, when we look back at the documents that we put together, talked about making clear spirits. As you do, I think that when you start a brewery, you probably start thinking about how do we sell oodles of beer? We better be like Molson. And then we realized one day that Molson's like Molson. We shouldn't do that.
yeah.
And the same thing with spirits. We should not try to make something fast. And the vodka makers are pretty good at what they do. What do we do in beer that works? And the answer was pretty simple. Beer that has lots of flavor was somewhere where we were staking out our ground. And we thought, well, what's the equivalent if we're gonna buy a still and make distilled spirits? What's the equivalent? And the answer was kind of twofold. One, single malt whiskey is where lots of flavor not only works but is appreciated. And number two, we looked at each other and said, "Well, what do you drink? Do you drink vodka?" And we both said, "No." How about gin? No. Do you drink whiskey? Oh yeah, drink whiskey. So we thought, well, why wouldn't we make what we love? So that's where it started. It was 2009 that the still came in. So it took us 2 years to kind of, as we do, analyze it to death and decide that we're going to jump off the edge of the cliff and spend more money on something else that we didn't really know how to do, and bought a still and started making. Within a couple of days of it arriving, we started making whiskey. So at least barreling whiskey.
Yeah, so your still is very unique in the distilling world, is it not? That there's like a compartment or chamber that was added on or something like that. I remember the story vaguely, but I can't remember exactly how.
Yeah, one of the things that we got into when we went to Michigan State University and had a chance to talk to the guys who actually make the equipment, was asking the stupid question, well, isn't a still basically just a big kettle? And the answer was yes. And we said, well, but we already own a kettle. We own a kettle to make beer with. Why don't we use that? Um, and the answer was, well, it's made out of stainless steel, and you really need copper contact in order to knock back the sulfury tones. We said, okay, well, that makes sense. What if we built something that sat on top of the kettle, made out of copper, to get that copper contact? And the fellows at Christian Carl said, well, that's not too bad an idea, but that's not a lot of copper contact. So we said, oh, yeah, good point. What if we took that thing and filled it with copper wool? So picture steel wool or Brillo pads, except made out of copper. And that helmet, what we call it, that sits on top of the brew kettle, is packed with that copper wool. So lots and lots of copper contact. And they said, well, this might work. And we started sketching out what it would look like. And at the end of the day, between us, we came up with a design that would work. Not knowing, well, the design would work, it would go on to the equipment. Would it actually function? We had no idea, but we thought, you know what, if you don't try, you don't know. So we bought the equipment and put it on there, and I've been using it right off the bat. And the main advantage to that is that our brew kettle is much bigger than our still. We could only afford a still of a certain size, and so we do our stripping runs actually in our brew kettle. And stripping runs, of course, are your first distillation. So we do the fermentation in the fermenters that we make beer with. And then we move it back over into the kettle with this modified helmet on top, do the stripping, and then we take those low wines and move them over to where the still is, and do the second distillation in the actual still itself.
That's really cool. I guess that's why you guys are so unique. We Whenever we talk about two brewers, we talk about how different it is than what's out there. Like
Yeah.
there's this incredible fruitiness that's synonymous with two brewers. And I wonder if it's because of your unique distilling method that
Yeah,
allows
I
that.
mean, we always talk about how, almost every single expression we've tried has this like unique distillery characteristic, and the distillate really does like shine through,
Mhm.
especially with the classic releases, I
Yeah.
think a large part as well. Um, what do you contribute that to? I mean, obviously you said when you made beer, super flavorful beer. I would love to try, just the distillate, like the white dog off the still and see what that
Yeah.
is. Because I mean, I'm sure it's just full of fruit. And you contribute your brewing style with beer to kind of what your distillate is like full of flavor.
Well, certainly one of the things that we talked about doing right off the word go, and have stuck to, is we know how to make beer. Let's make beer, and turn it into whiskey. So essentially, our grain selection is all over the map. In the same way that if we were making a stout, we would have an entirely different grain bill from making a lager. We will use those different grain bills to make the new make. So when you talk about the distillate, the white dog coming off the still, um, this batch might be made with black malts or chocolate malts or Vienna malts or honey malts or on and on. This one might be made with pale malt only. Our reasoning was that if it tastes real different coming off the still because of the grain, then it's going to taste real different later on.
Yeah.
A lot of the reading we did said, no, it doesn't matter. All the flavor comes from the barrel, and it really doesn't matter what you make your alcohol with. And we thought, well, that just doesn't make sense to us. So let's try this approach and see what happens. And Jeremy nailed it. The first couple of times we tasted the White Dog coming off the still, we looked at each other and said, "This is real different," and it's got to turn into something. I don't know about good because we didn't know, but it's got to turn into something real different later. If it's starting real different, it's going to finish real different. So I would attribute a lot of the. I'm not sure about the fruity flavors. I know exactly what you're getting at. It's hard to know whether that comes from the grain or the equipment or the technique or the fermentation. We ferment to a fairly low alcohol level, try to leave a lot of the sugars in the fermentation rather than distilling them out to create more alcohol. Probably all of those things line up to contribute toward the final flavor or final characteristic.
That would make sense. So you use many different types of malted barley and sometimes wheat, and are those the main two that you guys work with, or are there other grains that you're working with as well?
Yeah, those are the main two. We use a little bit of malted rye. We've just recently put down an experiment with some malted oats.
Oh, cool.
I think that's about the four grains we've used. We use a fair amount of peated malted barley. That's kind of the fifth category that is barley.
Right. Can we talk about the release we're drinking, the release 42, the classic?
Yeah, go for it.
This is one of the newest classic releases. Is that right? 42?
It is the newest classic.
It's the newest classic release, and a combination of malts in this one, right?
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of wheat in it, and then a lot of barley.
So you're malting wheat and you're malting barley for this.
We're buying malted wheat and malted barley.
Yeah, right.
We're using a combination of the two.
Right.
Where are you sourcing from Alberta for most of your grain selection, or is that a trick, like secret of the trade, or?
No. We use basically the same suppliers we use for our brewing malts. So some of it, like the peated barley, does come from Scotland.
Yeah.
We will use some specialty malts are imported, but a lot of the base malts is from Saskatchewan, and then a lot of the specialty malts are from BC and Alberta, either Gambrinus in the border region does a lot of it, and then across the prairies.
Yeah, this release 42 is so good. I mean,
So fruity.
what do you get? You get honey, you get vanilla, you get this like fruit note. It's like,
there's
what is
like
it?
this
Mango, papaya, melons.
yeah, like a cantaloupe kind of. I associate with like mango and cantaloupe and like stuff like that.
It's very like Scotch whiskey forward, like something like an ex-bourbon matured Scotch whiskey. You could be, I think, kind of confused if you gave this to someone and didn't tell them what it was.
It's like a hybrid, I find, between some really good Scotch and really good Irish single malts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like where I try to steer people when I'm talking about two brewers is, to describe it, it has these like crazy fruity notes that you'll get off of like an ex-bourbon aged Irish whiskey.
Right.
But then it has like the maltiness and the like breadiness that you get from like some Scotch as well, right? So
yeah, it's got that kind of like that triple distilled Irish kind of like soft creaminess to it as well.
Yeah. I think what makes it like, and I'm very curious actually, and I'm sure the answer is different for both of you, but I'm curious which of the malted barleys you like to work with the most, because I find that a couple of the expressions that have had chocolate malt in them like really hammer home that like fruity sweetness and that robust like wide profile. I don't know if that makes sense, but
when Tyson said that we use a lot of malted barley, he's bang on. But I would draw the distinction that while that malted barley is not just malted barley, it can be honey malt. It depends on how it's kiln. At the end of the day, is what I'm getting at. So
yeah.
Some of the malts will use like a black malt or a chocolate malt or as dark as the wall behind you.
Yeah.
And often we'll use Vienna malts, or which a Vienna malt is extremely bready and even almost nutty. And we're doing all that on purpose. We want, to a degree, we want every barrel in our pile to be a little bit different in the same way that if you were a painter, you would want every shade of blue to be a little bit different. If it was all the same shade of blue, you'd have a pretty boring sky.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to create with all these different grains. My personal favorites are, well, I guess I don't really have one in terms of, I find that all these different grains bring so many different things. It's really amazing to me when we sample out of a barrel quite often, looking at what went into it and what we're tasting coming out of it. It's quite an adventure.
Awesome.
When you're putting together a release like this Release 42, the classic, how many barrels are you blending in for this? Is it a larger batch or something kind of smaller?
So there's like that Release 42, for example, had about 5 or 6 different barrels in it. They're not necessarily full barrels. We're frequently ending up with, we'll take 20 kilograms of a barrel or half a barrel, just based on the final number we want. We find people, we want to do releases that get out there, but we found that people are looking for the next release pretty quickly. So we try to cycle through with some expediency.
Right. What's the angel share like where you guys, obviously you guys are pretty far north. Do you experience a lot or is it not too much? Like your summers don't get too hot, your winters kind of cold or?
Yes, we get pretty cold up here to the extent where we actually store all of our barrels in a warehouse. So like in our warehouse, in our facility. We can't keep them outside because they're one of the few places where a barrel of whiskey could actually freeze on the coldest day. And we don't know what that would look like. We don't want to see what that looks like. Our angel share is pretty high. We're a cold enough climate that it's intensely dry year round. So we lose a fair amount of alcohol and we lose even more water during the maturation.
So the ABV goes up similar to like a Kentucky bourbon would, like the ABV would go up, the water content would, whereas I guess in Scotland it's more the other way around. The ABV goes down.
So what's the highest ABV that you've pulled a cask from, like a single cask?
It's over 75%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, straight the hazmat. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's why you haven't released a cask strength version of anything, right?
Yeah, when we do higher strength, we definitely are still adding some water.
Yeah. So it's
too high for practicality.
For sure.
I mean, and you also have that beautiful water source, so I guess that contributes to like not being afraid to add a little bit of water to your expressions. Because I mean, you guys, I guess when you go near cask strength, it's around 58, right? That's usually. And any reason why that number kind of like seems to be repeated, or not necessarily any reason, just
there was probably a reason the first time around, and then we just stuck to it.
Right on.
It seems to be working out. We trial each release at the release ABV and make sure we're happy with it. We've done cask strength releases at 56, just thinking this one needs a little bit extra water. So it's 58 is probably the starting point each time.
Can you talk about the water? Because I think recently I was at a whiskey event and one person posed a question like, what's the most important ingredient in whiskey? And someone said water. Is water, like, where does it rank of importance? If you could give like a percentage on how important water is to the whiskey making process, what would you say?
It's a great question. Whenever we're asked about how much impact the water has on our final product, we a little bit tongue-in-cheek say we don't know because we've never made it without it.
right.
I don't know what it would taste like otherwise. it's very mineralized water and has always made great beer. We've always had success in winning beer awards. How much does it impact it? I'd say it's really hard to say. We're really happy with it in terms of what it brings, the mineralization that's in the water. Um, how much does it bring? I couldn't answer.
Yeah, I answered the question. I said the whiskey maker is the most important ingredient in the whiskey making process. I mean, anyone can source some good grain. Anyone can buy a decent barrel. But if your new make isn't great, doesn't matter about anything else, I think.
Yeah, I think the water is an X factor though, because um not everybody has access to good water.
Right.
Like, for example, City of Toronto water, it's good water, it's well filtered, but it's well filtered.
It's no glacier
It's
water
no
or
glacier water that's
Kentucky limestone
thousands of
water.
years old,
Sure.
that hasn't been touched by anyone, and
Yeah.
so I guess yes, I think, I don't know, I kind of agree with. I mean, the water. I don't think that the water is the most important thing, but I do think
It's
it
up
plays a
there.
huge factor. Yeah.
Moving on to this release 43. For the viewers who don't know, you have four main releases: a classic, a peated, special finishes, and an innovative series. Um, you said before the peated, you're getting peated barley from Scotland. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm just gonna quickly. I know how old these are. Is that okay to share that information, or?
Yeah, go ahead. For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, the youngest stuff, which actually happens to be the smallest amount of the portion of whiskey in this 42, is 10 years old, and then it's 11-year-old and 13-year-old in the 42, and the 43 is 100% single malt barley, yeah, malted barley, peated malted barley, and it's majority 9-year-old with 20%, I think, 10-year-old or something like that. Um, my question is, before we get into like how good both of these are, and you could talk a little bit about the peated, um, is this something that we're gonna come to expect from now on with like the ages of these? Like they seem to be creeping up into the 9, 10-year-old range. Is that something that's gonna be a regular thing? Is there enough? Uh, and then also, what is the oldest whiskeys that you have in your distillery right now, or your warehouse, I should say?
Yeah, so the ages of the whiskeys have definitely been creeping up. We're obviously no age statement intentionally, because it's not always the case that older is better. We know that some consumers will feel that way. So as soon as we stick a 7-year-old on a whiskey that's 80% 10-year plus, you're going to kind of change the perception.
Mhm.
But in general, our whiskeys have been creeping up over years in age, just as older mashes become available to us, and that's no reason to think that won't continue. As long as like we're not scared to put something younger into a blend with some older stuff. That improves it in our eyes. But having those older whiskeys is definitely nice. There's lots of nice stuff that takes a long time to develop. As far as the oldest stuff, we still have barrel one. So our oldest barrel is still there, going back to 2009.
Oh.
No idea what we're going to do with it. We do like we were released 44 PX finished special finish. Just went into our store a couple of days ago. I don't know when people will see this, but when we're talking, it's a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And that was going back to our fourth and our fifth mash, the majority of the liquid in there. So that's pushing for, I think it's 14 years old.
Oh, wow.
An age statement. And then some younger whiskey again blended in there to brighten things up. But it's definitely, there's some whiskey that's pretty old that's finding its way into us these days.
Yeah, I guess what like when you said your angel share is quite substantial, maybe getting up to pushing, 15, 16, 17 years might be the max. you guys might see in barrels like that? Like, is your first barrel like
Yeah.
quite full or?
So I haven't looked at it in a while. My guess is no. My guess is no. It's not quite full. We have tried to unbarrel and rebarrel some of those old mashes just as the ABV climbs. You start extracting different things. Do you want to debarrel them, add some water, get them down to a nice ABV again, and then put them back into a barrel to continue aging. So we tried to stay on top of that.
Right.
We're losing a lot of liquid. And then we've also found, I don't know if it's like I mentioned that the barrels are inside all the time. I think we tend to have a little bit of a quick maturation because they're always at room temperature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't get super hot, but they also don't get down into those kind of low temperatures, which might slow things down. So we found that as some of our whiskeys get a little bit older, they almost start to over mature. That you start to find flavors that maybe it was actually tasted a little bit better a couple of years ago, or it's just kind of gone a direction you didn't necessarily want it to. So I'm not sure that we'll keep aging things indefinitely beyond just the novelty of being able to do an age statement that's a big number.
Will there be a time where you guys move away from the numbered releases and introduce some sort of like core range kind of thing, or will this always kind of be the pattern, like just counting up and until the infinity or whatever?
Yeah, that's exactly the conversation we've had. Is that at some point that number gets so high it feels a little bit unwieldy. Like, do we really want to see release 147 on the shelf? Is that making sense for a consumer? So we feel we need to move away from it at some point, but we are still governed by the original limitation, which is that we only have so many barrels. We can't make the same thing over and over again. We don't really want to make the same thing over and over again. We want to keep exploring all these new and interesting flavors without being beholden to putting out the same line of whiskey over and over again.
Right.
So I think I'm pretty confident we will at some point move away from the numbered releases. What exactly we'll move into, the only thing we know about that is that it won't be the same whiskey over and over again.
Right. Maybe like a vintages or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're drinking this release 43, the peated, sourced, peated barley,
50% ABV.
50%
as well.
ABV. It's really interesting to get this peated version of your whiskey, and it marries very, very well. And I think this release, I mean, you were saying that this might be your favorite one you've had so far.
Of the peated,
Of the peated, yeah.
Well, so I should preface that because I had an opportunity to do to try a few samples for a store that was thinking about. It didn't end up working out, but the barrel I tried, the peated barrel that I tried out of those was, I would put that up against pretty much any peated whiskey in the entire world.
Wow.
And think it would win.
Wow.
Like triple gold. So I hope, I mean, Bob probably knows which cask that was, or at least he could probably look it up. I hope something special comes from that one, because I mean, maybe I've already tried it in one of the releases, but that one was a special single cask. But I mean, it's not really a fair comparison because that's a single cask versus a blended, like
Right.
a blend of casks, right? So
yeah.
But this is definitely up there. It's really, really good.
Yeah. What are the challenges of using like a peated barley?
I think maybe the biggest challenge for us is just kind of getting the right kind of peat flavor to come through. We are pretty happy with a lot of the peated blends we put together, but they don't get into the kind of real peat head flavors. They're more of a leather and a tobacco and ashes, which again is I think we're getting the best out of the distillate we're finding, but I don't know how we increase the peatiness of it to really satisfy those special peat lovers.
What's the ppm level? Are you given that when you buy the barley, or are you like, can you choose from various ppm levels?
Yeah, we get it on the barley we buy, but it's pretty wide range. It's I think 35 to 60 ppm. If
Okay.
I'm recalling. It's we special order the extra heavily peated stuff, so that we know we can blend it back with unpeated whiskey.
Right.
Nice.
But there's some secret sauce in there to get the crazy peatiness that some of those Islay distilleries get. We don't know.
Yeah, is that the
It's
key?
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that the key to like to go as heavy as you can and then blend it back because you don't want to risk maybe not having it, not having the peat be that influential. You want to go heavier and then blend it back versus going the other way around.
That's our typical approach. We've definitely done some mashes that have a partial peat mash for specific reasons. Sometimes we're casking something specifically for a potential single cask release. So we'll kind of combine. We're intending to not blend that, so we want to kind of do the blending when we do the mashing,
Right.
and then sometimes we just do a lesser peat just to see how it changes. But the general direction is that we figure we can always blend out the peats. We know we can't add more peat later.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, like this peated release is like it's a softer, rounder peat, like you said before, like the nice like leathers, the ashiness, like a little bit of barbecue
Yeah.
note on it. It is I would say like a more like a delicate. If you compare it to like the heavy hitters of Scotland, this is a more creamy, roundier peated Scotch
It's
profile.
there's a little bit of a like, um I don't know if you guys have ever done this before, but you cut a peach, you basically have a peach and you barbecue it,
No.
but on a charcoal barbecue,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm getting on this.
I totally agree because you can again with like we said before that you still get the distillery characteristic coming through
Yeah,
with almost every release I think, and you
absolutely.
get it with this one as well.
Would you attribute some of that to like what would you say like a typical fermentation time is? Is it like, would you say that yours are longer than usual, or?
I don't know what's usual, honestly, because I've pretty much just come up doing what we do. But we take about a week. So I think it probably is on the longer side of normal, especially we only go up to about 10% ABV. I think a lot of whiskeys will go higher. So we're maybe taking a little bit longer, but we're not going nearly as far.
Right on. This expression that this release that Jeremy's pouring right now is one that I think I'm on my last bottle of, which is really sad because I bought about 5 of them. And it's released 28, which I don't know, for whatever reason. I think it was because it's I I purchased and I hunted down a second bottle of release 24, and like kind of the most eye-opening like moment in whiskey in the six like time period was release 24 for me, because
Mhm.
I remember trying that thinking like, these guys have the opportunity here, like with this, like producing stuff like this, they're gonna be known as one of the best distilleries in the entire world.
Yeah.
And I've gone on record saying some crazy things, and people are holding me to it. So you guys got to prove me right. But this one was supposed to be like the most similar to that release 24. This release 28.
Yeah, I mean, we're singing your guys' praise. I mean, I think that when people think like Canadian whiskey, they automatically go to like the biggest producers and they think about, a rye corn hybrid that mixes well
Yeah.
with a soft drink. This whiskey, the stuff that you guys are making, redefines Canadian whiskey for a modern take and kind of puts it on a world map. I think that can compete with the best stuff of any country that's producing whiskey.
Yeah.
And I think it's the single malt. Like It's just for us, like we're big single malt fans, so we're glad that Canada is like heading in a more direction of focusing on single malt. And I mean, I don't think anyone's doing it better than you guys are right now.
Yeah, I mean, okay, to add to that, I think what's great about the 4 or 5 single malt distilleries that I really like in Canada, um, that specialize, I should say, in single malt, is that they're all so different.
Hmm.
They're all so different. Like you guys are incredibly different from Macalones, which has a very like Scotch focused style, let's say. And then Shelter Point, again, a different completely direction. Like everyone tastes very different. And I think that's a great thing because
Yeah.
then you don't necessarily compete with each other either. You're not trying to make the exact same thing. You're making very different things, and that makes the community as a whole grow, right? And we're loving this stuff. So, um, release 44. Tell us a little bit about that because that's coming out, or it's out. Sorry, it's out already, and I actually almost pulled the trigger on it today, but I got sidetracked at work. So,
Don't you hate it when work gets in the way of?
I know,
Well,
right?
actually,
Of
for us,
buying a
work
good
gets in the
whiskey.
way all the time. So yeah, it's actually kind of a good thing when work gets in the way here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Tyson knows more about 44 than I do. Yeah, just another sherry finish release. Like I mentioned before, some really some of our oldest whiskey, and really a lot of depth of oak character. That's honestly I had to blend out a little bit. It was borderline of getting into some astringent bitter stuff. That's it takes a lot of time for a lot of contact time between oak and whiskey to get to that point. So we had to brighten it up a little bit. But I really a bit of a I was actually having some the other night, and I thought it's a bit of a flip on some of our other sherry finish whiskeys, where for whatever reason there's a really bright kind of cherry character to it
Hmm.
from the sherry, whereas a lot of the times I find, especially our PX finishes, get more darker fruits. So there's a real depth and character from the oak, and then this brightness from the fruit, as opposed to a real deep, dark, rich fruit flavor, and then kind of brighter maltiness. So I think it's a really nice take on the PX finish.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Tyson, sorry,
I would say, sorry, I would
go
say
ahead.
that the first time I tried it, it surprised me. In fact, I asked Tyson if he was sure that he had the right notes beside it because there was definitely that fruitiness from the sherry, but I always think of it as kind of a big date, really deep, deep sweetness. And this was not that. When Tyson talks about cherries, black cherries, it's all over that one. And he's right. It's a flip on our normal, and it's a good flip. I think.
Nice. That's awesome. So Tyson, tell us a little bit more about your role right now with Two Brewers, and how long, like, is it relatively new? Has it been a couple years now? How long have you been in this role with Two Brewers?
It's relatively new, about 2 years now. I started here full time about 7 years ago, and they were looking for a little bit extra help on the distilling side. And I have a background in chemical engineering, so had a little bit of a knowledge base for that sort of the processes for the chemistry, and just kind of as Alan has pretty much wound back his day to day here to zero. So as he was doing that, he was looking for somebody to take over the whiskey. And slowly handed it off over probably the last 5 years. Then about 2 years ago, he stopped showing up. So I've been looking after it.
So, and what does that look like? That's like the distilling, the blending, all of it, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah. We have a couple other distillers, a couple other people who are running the bottling lines and running the still. We have just our regular brewers who are making the washes. That's always been the case. We have plenty of people with a good amount of skill in the industrial whiskey making processes, beer making processes. So I lean pretty heavily on those guys. But when it comes time to blend stuff up, when it comes time to design all of the whiskey that we're making for 9, 10, 11 years from now, that's all me.
Very cool. One question I always like to ask whiskey producers, when you're not drinking your own supply, what's in your cabinet at home? What do you guys lean to? Are you Scotch drinkers, bourbon, other Canadian stuff? What do you go to when you're not drinking Two Brewers?
Well, for me, if I'm not drinking Two Brewers, I've probably got a bourbon.
Yeah.
Only because I really, back when we got into this, I knew nothing about bourbon. I had no appreciation for bourbon, and I probably like a lot of neophyte bourbon drinkers, I kind of found it a little bit challenging until my palate got it figured out, and now I love it. So,
Nice.
so yeah, I would probably lean toward a bourbon. Yeah, I find that I almost always get my fill of whiskey during my work day. So I don't drink that much at home, but when I do, I try to honestly be mindful of benchmarking as to what else is going on. So like last week, I opened up a bottle of Sons of Vancouver, Palm Trees and Tropical Breeze. Nice to see what else is going on in Canada.
Yeah.
I'll try to pick up a good Scotch every now and then, and just that's kind of the North Star is what they're doing in Scotland for us, and try and keep a perspective on what else is going on there.
Very cool. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say that if a bottle of whiskey turns up here that I don't know where it came from, I can be sure that Tyson found it somewhere and read about it and sourced it out and wanted to, heard some different things or some good things or some comments that made him curious. And next thing you know, a bottle of it turns up for tasting. Although I will say there's about 40 bottles of whiskey behind us that are barely cracked. We better get busy.
Yeah, that's a problem that we all have, I think.
Yeah.
Too much whiskey, too little time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's one bottle of Two Brewers, one of the releases that we don't have in front of us, and that's the Innovative series. Do you guys have an innovative release in the works that's coming up next that you can talk about, or?
We do have an innovative release that's in the works, but I actually don't know if I want to talk about it yet.
Okay.
A little bit something different than what we've been doing, and I don't know if
Okay.
I want to spill the beans quite yet. The last one we did was the release 40 that was in barrels that had previously held coffee beans.
The coffee bean.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's a new one. I think the next one we're going to try, it's a little bit of a lark. We'll see if it works out or not. It's potentially using some of the wash from a new whiskey as part of the deproofing process.
Interesting. Is playing around with that kind of stuff like a really cool thing? Are you kind of like concerned that stuff won't turn out? Has any innovative project not turned out where you've had to either like redistill it or figure out something to do with it?
They have so far all turned out eventually.
Yeah.
So there's always the backup plan. Like we have a couple of old sour mashes. I think we did eventually do a sour release. It was a while ago. But we had some sour mashes that we tasted them a lot before we decided that they were starting to come around, and a lot of them have been used in little bits here and there to kind of build character in another whiskey, but not necessarily deserving of being the star of the whiskey.
Right.
I think it does go to the fact that we're brewers first, and that's why it's in our name. And the idea that you've probably had beers that are sour beers, pretty popular style these days. And we thought, well, what if we soured a wash and then distilled it? And that goes back a long time now, but we did exactly that. And you asked the question about tasting the new make as it comes off the still, and that was one that we tasted. And I clearly remember Al and I standing there tasting what was coming off the still and looking at each other going, oh my God, we'll never be able to use this, not in 100 years. It is the weirdest set of flavors ever. And we actually had the conversation, do we dump it now or do we dump it into a barrel and dump it later? And we decided, well, if you don't dump it in a barrel, you won't know. So we put it in a barrel, and it did take a few years until we started to take samples from that barrel and say, there's something going on here that's actually kind of good and kind of useful. It's not what I expected. So, hats off to the barrels. They're a magician when it comes down to taking X and turning it into Y.
Right. Very cool.
Interesting. So, maybe let's talk a little bit about where we're headed with Two Brewers. Is there a plan to? I I remember having a conversation. I think it was with you, Bob, where we spoke about how many barrels are put away a year, and at the time, I think it was around 48 or
48 is a
24.
big year for us.
48,
40
right?
probably more typical. Yeah, 48 would be a big year. Yeah, not a lot.
So is that still kind of the practice, or are you guys have you increased since? What's the amount of barrels that you guys are putting away a year now?
I would say it's still the practice. I think, as we talked about earlier on, we use all our brewing equipment to make whiskey, both to create the fermentation in the first place and then to do the stripping. We have to take the brew house back apart and stick that crazy helmet on top. We're at a time of year now where we really can't do it. We're so hard pressed to make beer. Summer's coming, tourists are coming, and the beer consumption goes up. So we'll start making whiskey again at the end of summer. So we're without changing the way we do it, which we could do, but without changing the way we do it, we're pretty well limited to that. I will say that we pulled Al out of his semi-retirement and given him a task to go through barrels starting at barrel number one and pulling out samples from each one and putting together some tasting notes for each one, because of course we know what went into it. We have notes from of what we were tasting over time, but over time might be 5 years ago for any specific barrel or even longer. We want to know what each one tastes like and which ones want to be a special single cask release, if any. So we're exploring that, and it's fun to. No one better to get to do that than Al, who probably created the recipe 15 years ago anyway. So he should be the one who's seeing what did it become. Knowing Al's mind, he remembers making it. So so it'll be interesting to see what he finds in the little treasure trove of barrels.
Interesting. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, we were talking with Sons of Vancouver, and they were talking about upping their production, and I think they tried to like double their production, and the results really weren't what they were expecting. So I guess it makes sense to just keep things as they are if that's what works.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix
Or
it.
maybe just keep the whiskey production exactly the same and just start brewing beer in a different facility, because we want the we want the Two Brewers whiskey to not to change, because this is fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the fear, right? If you switch up, like you put like you buy a new warehouse with new stills and all this other stuff, and try to compete with a market that's not kind of what you've been doing for the last 15 years or whatever it's been. You run the risk of changing your whiskey, right?
Right.
So I guess that's kind of, like Jeremy said, just maybe open up another
Just
spot
start
to
brewing
brew
beer somewhere else. Yeah.
That's all we have to do. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's obviously a question for Tyson. I've been pretty happy with my involvement in both beer and whiskey making over the years, and I'm obviously going to be out the door before he is, one way or another. So those decisions will be his in time. But for me, I would never change a thing because whiskey's always been fun, and I would hate it to be so productive or production related that it wasn't fun anymore, and that sales mattered. And not that they don't. We can't go broke while we're, you know, having this money pit that we don't want to have. But by the same token, for me, it's all about the liquid. 100% about the liquid. It's nice to get paid for it from time to time, but it's all about the liquid. I know Al and I used to joke that as we were putting this pile of barrels together, which it was 7 years before we sold the first drop, but we just kept putting barrels aside at the cost that was involved in making barrels. That one of these days we'll retire either based on the sales of this whiskey or we'll just drink it. One or the other. That's our two options.
That's like us with the collecting whiskey too. We either
Yeah.
just drink it one day or just sell it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, which probably will be the former rather than the latter.
Yeah.
Drink it
right.
one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
um very cool. Really appreciate having you guys on. If you guys want to like share anything that's coming up that will get mega fans like me excited, you're more than welcome to that. Or you can tell everybody where to find your whiskey, which is important as well.
Yeah, well, we have we mentioned release 44, a PX finish that just was released here middle of May. So I don't know when people actually here will see this, but it will be available through brewerswhiskey.com. We've just opened up a national shipping on there, so we have forever struggled to get whiskey into the hands of people east of Alberta, and that's finally open to us. And we actually have a very small single cask release coming out probably in the next couple of days, actually.
Ooh.
Oh wow.
That is a 40% rye barrel that we really like. So that will be 45, and then got some ideas for release 46. But those are it's a little far afield. We've just done four or five releases in quick succession. So take a breather and then get back to it.
So hopefully this video doesn't come out until after that's released, so we get a shot at that.
I mean, we can release this video whenever we want.
Yeah,
I was
so
just going to say, if
we'll-
anyone controls that, I think I know who it is.
I mean, if you could put a couple aside for us to buy, then we'll release it sooner rather than later. But
I think it should be in the online store by the end of the week. So it should be
Okay.
awesome, very cool.
Awesome. What about your beer? Because like we haven't tried the beer. I would love to try it.
I have tried.
You
it.
have tried it.
Dave from Alberta, the one of Yukon's reps, sent me some beer.
So can you
I
buy the
didn't
beer
share,
the same
obviously.
places you can buy the whiskey then?
more or less.
Okay.
It's the whole distribution system in Canada is weird.
No
It
kidding.
probably
Yeah.
covers all of it. So we do have some stores that have both whiskey and beer, more likely to be found in Alberta than BC. We, generally speaking, other than our online store, do not ship east of Alberta. We do have whiskey in France and we have whiskey in Scotland, which is kind of fun. But it's a lot easier to get whiskey into Europe than into other provinces, quite honestly.
That's crazy.
Not trying to be, not trying to, slag anybody. It's just the reality of it all.
Yep.
So yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, fair enough. Hopefully that will change and that Canada will open up provinces to accepting of free trade between all different provinces. Because, like, I mean, why not? Especially when it's made in Canada. You should be able to buy it throughout Canada without any red tape or hurdles to cross.
Absolutely. I had just to add to that, I had a Two Brewers stout, chocolate stout, I think it was, which was absolutely bonkers.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
yeah. I
phenomenal.
need to do that. I need to have a beer and then a whiskey. I think is the proper way to do it.
Side by side.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you mentioned Dave in Alberta, and Dave's been with us forever. He's a great guy. But it's a staple of his that if he does a whiskey event, that he's got beer there. Because he says he's the most popular guy in the room about half an hour before it closes when people have been sampling whiskey all night and they just want a beer.
Yeah.
Dave always does that. Always.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure for us to talk to you guys. If you're watching this and you want to venture into some Two Brewers, any of the one that releases is great. I think that the classic will really give you a really good idea of what the distillate is like and how it's so unique. And then, the peated, if you're a peat head, definitely go for that. Special finishes are amazing if you like something.
Always innovatives, always really
And then the
good as well.
innovatives is so out there and so unique.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff as well.
Well, thanks to you guys for your interest. There's nothing more fun than talking whiskey with whiskey people. So thanks for doing this.
It's truly our pleasure, and we look forward to every Two Brewers release, and I'll be probably making a purchase later on this week, unfortunately. Unfortunately for my bank account. But yeah, no, that's great. I'm excited for it. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks,
Really
guys.
appreciate
Really
it.
much appreciated, and have a good one. Cheers.
Thanks a lot, you guys. You take care. Cheers for now.
Cheers.